Hey guys, this is Hunter Levine, and thank you for listening to the Captain's Collective. If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably likely that we share a mutual love for nature. Whether you're an avid hunter, fisherman, hiker, trapper, or all the above, we love experiencing the outdoors. And as beautiful as Mother Nature can be, she can also be powerful and devastating. On October 10th, 2018, Hurricane Michael hit Florida's Forgotten Coast up in the northwest panhandle, with wind gusts reaching 160 miles an hour. On this episode, we sit down with Captain Cleve Evans of Forgotten Coast on the Fly, which is located in Mexico Beach, which experienced the blunt of the storm. As a kid, Cleve spent his days chasing fish around the waters of Georgia and North Florida, and after a season of working in the restaurant industry and saving money, he and his wife bought a beautiful home near the waters of Florida's Gulf and began his charter business. Years later, all would be lost to Hurricane Michael. But the Evans and their community have been resilient and working their way through rebuilding what was lost. Between frustrations with the insurance companies, relief agencies, things have been a challenge. We found out about Cleve's situation through one of our partners, Guide Beer of Sweetwater Brewing Company. Sweetwater designed Guide Beer to help guides who are in a hard place and need, and in August of 2019, they were able to meet with Cleve, hear his story, and give him a check from the percentage of the proceeds so that he could continue to move forward and do what he loves. We loaded up the truck, drove into Mexico Beach, and recorded this interview in Cleve's home. And I have to say that after seeing the destruction, even a year later, this was one of the most emotional and challenging things that I've encountered on this journey. For photos or ways that you can get involved in helping rebuild, check out the blog at captainscollective.com. Thank you for listening. This is the Captain's Collective.
Success is a gift. Excellence is the only thing to strive for.
He tried to eat it. Hit him. You got him. He's on.
Two butt caps off the rods, filled them with tequila. We took a shot and out we went.
There ain't no getting into it after that. You're hooked. It's a bad habit.
And all the time Flips, he's standing there ready to go for a tarpon. And he turned around, he said, "You talk so much, you're like a senator."
All right. Hey, Cleve, thanks for hanging out with us tonight and giving us some time to be on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Glad y'all made it over.
So you have a little bit of a different background than a lot of the guys that I've met so far. I know that you grew up in Georgia, and then eventually you ended up in Florida's Forgotten Coast. And I'd love just to hear about your background and how you got into guiding.
Well, it's something that I always wanted to do, kind of post-college. Been taking people fishing all my life, whether it was when we were 10 or 20 or 25 or whatever. And I always got a lot of enjoyment out of, putting people on their first fish or their biggest fish, or just sharing the moment, whether it was brim or bass or stripers or redfish or, eventually tarpon, trout in the mountains. Kind of once I got settled in after college, I lived in North Carolina for a while, did a lot of trout fishing up there, and then had an opportunity with some friends to get in on a restaurant deal in Auburn, Alabama. And that kind of became my plan to make the money that I needed to move to Florida and get my skiff, which I already had one skiff, but to upgrade my skiff, kind of build a website, do whatever I needed to do to kind of, generate business and start an actual, professional guiding career. The Auburn thing, it kind of got stalled out with the economy in 2008 crashing. Kind of delayed my master plan a little bit, but eventually worked through that, stuck it out there, eventually sold the restaurant, and didn't really make the money I'd planned on making, but still was determined. So I moved to Port St. Joe and started working with a guy here locally on an offshore boat, just to bring in some income and afford me the ability to get my captain's license and then pursue inshore type fly fishing, sight fishing.
What type of restaurant was it?
It was a bar and grill. It was sat about a couple hundred seats, had a full bar. Actually, it was one of the first restaurants outside of Georgia, or bars outside of Georgia, to sell Sweetwater beer on draft.
Nice.
Kind of ironically. And actually, Freddie and the crew came down to introduce Sweetwater outside of Georgia, and we were one of the first 2 or 3 bars there in Auburn. Was kind of one of their test markets to introduce it outside of Atlanta and outside of Georgia. So
You seem like it would be like a barbecue. You seem like a barbecue kind of guy because you got that name. Cleves.
Yeah, it's a bar and grill. It started in Athens. It's called Locos. It was they're still around. I think Atlanta in that area, North Georgia area. But no, it was wings and burgers and sandwiches and a lot of beer, full liquor. A little wine here and there, but the focus was the draft beers, and we had 28 taps, which back in 2003, 2004 in Auburn was kind of a big deal.
But the dream was always to
guide, yeah. And that was supposed to be my big money scheme, to sell the restaurant after 3 years and move here.
To Mexico Beach, or
to the St. Joe, Mexico Beach area, which is where I'd kind of set my sights on. My granddad had a house in Panama City, and I knew Panama City was kind of not my speed as far as just the traffic and the spring break and I'd always loved the Mexico
mini
Beach
golf
area.
and
go-karts and such.
You don't seem like a bungee jumping dude.
Yeah, I only go to Panama City when I have to, for the necessities, for the Walmart, and things like that you can't always find over here. And so once we kind of got through our woes with the restaurant and got out from under it and sold it, I came here. Just put my head down and grinded it out. Did get to meet some cool guys, other guides, cross paths at the boat ramp, and some of the guys that work for Shallow Water, which I got kind of on board with, which really helped me kind of get my calendar filled in, being a new guide, just starting out, not really knowing the marketing side of it, and the having the background here in Florida, like a lot of guides have, and that are multiple generations and whatnot. I was kind of just throwing my hat in there and trying to figure it out. So I got in with some good guys, and they definitely helped me along and got me started. So that's kind of how I ended up being here in St. Joe Beach. And
so what about Florida? And I listened to your Southeastern Fly interview, and it seems like growing up where you grew up, it would have been really easy for you to end up being like a mountain man.
And I almost was a mountain man. I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I grew up, my grandmother had a cabin in North Georgia right on the Appalachian Trail. The mountains always intrigued me a lot. I spent a lot of time up there, when I was younger and through college and post-college. But I also my granddad was a beach guy, was a coastal guy, so I was kind of torn between the two. I think I said earlier, I lived in Bryson City, worked at the Nantahala Outdoor Center in North Carolina for 3 years, and then moved to Black Mountain right outside of Asheville, where I lived for about 1.5 years prior to the big move to Auburn being, I thought Auburn was cool. It was kind of in between. You could make a 4 or 5 hour run to the mountains or a 3 or 4 hour run to the beach. That's when I really started kind of leaning more towards the beach. I love the mountains. I still love the mountains. I'm headed there this weekend, but the beach was what really captivated me, and just the variety of fish you could target, and the year-round fishery, and I just couldn't seem to get enough of it. So,
Was there a moment when it clicked that that's what you wanted to do? I mean, the saltwater side.
I don't know if there was a defined moment. Definitely once I got, dedicated with the fly rod, and me and a couple of buddies, one in particular, started hitting the every weekend, every chance we could, coming down, fishing West Bay and East Bay and Crooked Island Sound and St. Joe Bay, and I mean, once you hook up, catch your first red on fly, or hook your first tarpon on fly, you kind of just, it just grabs you. It's I can catch trout all day, and I'm not taking anything away from the guys who do and that love to do it. But to me, it doesn't compare, and maybe if I was in Wyoming or Idaho or Alaska, I might feel differently, but my mountain experience, for the most part, other than some trips to Colorado and Utah and different places, was the North Georgia trout scene, and it was just, to me, wasn't what I felt like I needed to end up doing. Saltwater was it, so.
And you said your grandpa was like a big draw. He was kind of the saltwater influence in your life growing up.
Yeah. He had a beach house in Panama City, and he had several boats, some like Carolina skiff style boats that he kept there. He also had a couple of kind of cabin cruiser / sport fisher type boats that he kept there. So he kept us on the water a lot when we were there. If we ever complained about it, because we were tired of going or whatever, he'd send us out on one of the Captain Anderson party boats with about 60 other people, just to show us how good we had it. He'd send one of our uncles out with 6 or 8 of us to kind of punish us and
beat you up a little bit.
Yeah, bring us back to reality.
That sounds like the funniest trip advisor I've ever heard for a captain.
Yeah. He and then he also had a house over in Panacea where he retired, and kind of through my later teen years and early 20s, he lived there. And same deal, he had a big cabin cruiser type sport fisher he kept on railroad tracks in his yard that he could lower and raise into the yard. It was like his own boat ramp type deal, which was pretty cool. And he had a 20-foot skiff that we'd run around and fish the bay over there, and fish the oyster bars and fish the shoal and all that on that side of things. So I was getting a pretty good look at two different kind of sides of the Panhandle, as far as the beach and the glitzy and the Miracle Strip, and then the laid back Panacea, Ocklawackney Bay, Alligator Point side of the Panhandle. So it was kind of neat. And then I had a good friend who had a house here in Mexico Beach throughout my childhood, and in between there and Panama City and Panacea, when we were in college, and in those years we'd spend our spring breaks and our New Year's Eves and our a week or two here and there during the summer, hanging out at the house here in Mexico Beach.
So did you decide you want to go saltwater? And the Forgotten Coast is kind of an interesting part of Florida, because it's not necessarily what people think when you envision somebody chasing a tarpon, or, was it always the Forgotten Coast that you wanted to come to? Did you ever kind of have any Keys dreams or anything like that?
No, I never really did. And I'd been to the Keys a few times, and early on in my college years, and fished a little bit down there, but there was just something about it. It was close to my family, or close-ish to my family. They were in LaGrange in Georgia, so it's 4.5 hours away. But it just it was laid back. It was kind of off the beaten path, but not so far that you couldn't access the necessities of town. and I think, I was definitely, I grew up in the country outside of town. I never was a city guy. I kind of like the appeal of being off the beaten path, so that was definitely a big draw.
So your grandfather had a big influence, sort of to pull you to the coast. But I know in previous interviews you've talked about the influence that your grandmother had on you pursuing fishing. I would love for you to share a little bit about that.
She so it was actually that was my mom's parents. They got divorced before I ever knew them together. And I think I was maybe 1 or 2 when they separated and got divorced. And she, in the deal, got a cabin in North Georgia, in a little town called Suches, which is equally as off the beaten path as say Port St. Joe or even more so. It's not even a town, so to speak. I mean, it has a post office and like a general store, but that's about all you got. And we would we would always go, me and my cousins would go to a summer camp up in Tallulah Falls called Athens Y Camp. And then we would spend a couple of 3 weeks straight with, I guess our parents had it figured out, with my grandmother, where they just kind of dropped us off and let us run wild in the mountains. She was a diehard trout fisherman. Not on the fly, but on her little rooster tails and her Zebcos and her salmon eggs and her corn, which isn't supposed to go in shrimp and grits, by the way, but some places put it in there.
I was kind of enjoying it. I had shrimp and grits tonight at the one restaurant open out here that's a year after the hurricane. There's only one restaurant, just to paint the picture. We're sitting currently in Cleve's house that's got a flood line 6 feet high and everything's gutted out, and we got some photos on the website for it. But I ordered shrimp and grits, and I was real excited about it, and our waitress was kind of getting sassy, and I don't know if she was trying to flirt with Cleve or
She's flirting with you.
And then she had some corn in there, and I kind of liked it, but she wasn't too happy.
She had
I
her own
ordered
opinion
that.
about
She
the
was
way
distraught.
shrimp and grits was
Yeah.
supposed to be served. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my grandmother, she would in Lake Winfield, Scott, where the cabin is, it's like it's a part of the Chattahoochee National Forest up there, and there's 2 little dirt roads that have cabins, and there's probably about 28, 30 cabins, and so every summer they would have a big fish fry for the cabin owners, and it ended up being more than just the cabin owners. It'd be people from the community and whatnot. And so she would take us, and I guess took it upon herself to supply the trout for the fish fry. And you're talking a fish fry for, anywhere from 65 to maybe 100 people, pretty big gathering. And so she knew all the game wardens, and knew all the hatchery guys. And this was long enough ago where you could schmooze them with cookies or pies or pickle or tomato relish or whatever, because she canned everything she could and made all kinds of relishes. And so back then there wasn't internet, and there wasn't a easy way to know when they were going to stock all the streams in the area, but she knew, because she bribed them all into giving her the intel that she needed to know when she needed to be at a certain spot where they were going to dump those trout out of the truck. And she would have us there with our corn and our salmon eggs and our little Zebco classics, and we'd be waiting. So we accumulated a lot of trout. Granted, they're put in there just for that purpose, but she had chest freezers at the cabin, and she would stock up, and she would have 300 or 400 trout, in a couple weeks. And that was kind of how we spent our summer days, would be plowing through Cooper's Creek and Rock Creek and different creeks in North Georgia, trying to corner the market on the stock trout, to get the supply up for the fish fry. And she was pretty amazing when it came to her dedication to trout fishing.
She sounded resourceful.
She was well known in the area, and she not only got it for the fish fry, but if anybody else she knew needed trout or wanted trout and didn't trout fish, she would make sure that they were going to have whatever they needed for their family fish fry or whatever.
That's a lot like Hunter's story. Hunter's was
my
your grandfather.
My great grandpa was a mullet fisherman in Tampa. I'm 5 generations of Tampa, and I live in Tallahassee now. And he would during the Great Depression, he would go around to all my family members across Tampa. Before he'd sell his mullet, he'd make sure that they had what they needed. And it's kind of cool when you hear about people who, they're that dedicated and resourceful. She sounds kind of spunky.
She was at it every chance she got. She one time, there's also a lake there, Lake Winfield Scott, which is the name of the little recreation area. And brown trout weren't really that common. They were only stocking rainbows mainly back then. And this was probably, I might have been 16, 17. Somehow there's some brown trout in the lake. And she caught a 10-pound brown trout one time. And she actually took a picture of it. But then she took it home and cleaned it. And she didn't think anything about it.
Yeah.
Huge 10-pound brown trout. This little 5'4" butterball of a woman, and she's like the envy of all.
Did she put
trout.
It on her Instagram and hashtag it?
Yeah, exactly.
Tag all her sponsors.
I wish I had that picture. Somebody in the family has that picture. I don't have it, but it'd be nice to have.
The Cabin Pro staff.
Yeah, she was tagging Zepco and canned corn and some corn company.
Team John Boat and all that.
I love that, though, and it's kind of cool because in some ways, you had your grandma influencing you with the mountains, and you had your grandpa influencing you with the coast. And something that, you were talking about with your grandma, she was resourceful, and it sounded like she had some resilience. And, what I know about you and the fact that we're sitting here right now in this city a year later with not much change, and we're going to talk about that. But, you went through the traumatic event of Hurricane Michael. And then you had to kind of get back to work.
Yep.
And could you talk to us some about the challenges that you experienced with the hurricane, and then also some of the resilience that you had to have in order just to get back to work and get back on the water and try to keep moving forward?
I mean, obviously a lot of people, we all went through it. And a lot of, there's a pretty big swath of destruction from, say, Port St. Joe to Panama City. And most people, I feel like, wanted to stick it out and be here. A lot of people chose to leave, whether they were selling and pulling up roots, or whether they just couldn't afford to stay or couldn't figure out a way to stay. But I mean, my wife and I were pretty determined that this is where we wanted to be. And we'd worked hard to afford to buy the house and to be here. And we weren't gonna let it, push us away. I'd only been living here for 6 years. It wasn't like I was, multi-generational, local. But I knew I loved the area. And I loved what I was doing. And I wasn't going to let it, keep me from pursuing what I dreamed about and worked hard to get to that point. Obviously we took it pretty hard. We were about 150 yards from the beach and had some pretty serious storm surge. Obviously the winds kind of trashed the yard, the trees, the 80-year-old pines that were snapped like toothpicks in the yard. And we just made up our mind that we were gonna battle the insurance company, do whatever we needed to do, beg family and friends, reach out for help, and do whatever it took, to try to, be able to afford to stick it out and stay here, not just afford it financially, but, mentally and emotionally as well. And it's been tough. I mean, it's still tough. We were lucky enough that I was guiding in Louisiana at the time. I got there in the fall. I'd just gotten there about 10 days prior to the storm. And with Michael, it didn't really give us that much, forewarning. It was 4 days out. Oh, it's popping up off the Yucatan. 4 days later, it's 5 days later. It's here. It wasn't like it popped up off the coast of Africa and gave us a lot of time. So I was in Louisiana, and I didn't really have time to come back. And they kept kind of downplaying it like it was gonna build up to a 3 and then drop to a 2 before it came to shore, or a 4 and then a 3. And we'd already been through the remnants of Irma the year before, and we'd been through some tropical, depressions or storms that we had, 70 to 80 mile per hour winds. We were thinking, oh yeah, 3, we'll be fine, and but it didn't want to stop at a 3 or a 4. It kept on building and kept on coming, and so I was in Louisiana. I was my wife worked and still works for the hospital in Panama City, which was also destroyed. Bay Medical on kind of the east side of Panama City, and was completely put out of commission for about 4 months. So I was fortunate enough to be in Louisiana, still be able to guide there. After I came back here and did some work around the house, just kind of trying to do some initial cleanup and more or less like mold remediation type stuff to try to kind of preserve what we had, if what we had was still going to be salvageable, which has turned out that it's not, but we didn't know that at the time. So we were going to work as hard as we could to try to preserve as much as we could. And Bay Medical also paid their employees and my wife for the 90 days while they kind of got back up and running. So we were lucky. I mean, to both be able to still, bring in income and that helped us, at least in our resilience of being able to say, hey, we can do this, we can stay here, we'll make this work. As far as guiding goes, the challenge here locally was that there was nowhere for anybody to stay, to be. That even if people wanted to come, in the months following, and still it's if you want to come down here and go fishing or just come down for the vacation, you kind of got to work a little bit harder at it. It's not like you just jump on VRBO and say, oh, we got 100 options. Let's pick the best one, or whatever one it's. I think the people that are coming here now, at least at this point, are the people that loved it already, that were determined that this was where they went with their family every year. This is where they were going to continue to go. And that's part of what makes the area pretty neat and different from a lot of other, areas of Florida.
That and your corn and your shrimping grits.
Yeah, special things like that.
Little touches.
So yeah, I mean, we made up our mind that we were going to figure it out and do whatever we needed to do to make it work. So that's why we're here, like a lot of people in a travel trailer, next to the house, waiting to work through our insurance, woes that most people, from what we have learned, are also going through, and just put our heads down and stayed determined.
Well, and I know that you worked hard to get here, and we talked about that with the restaurant and the dream to come here. And a lot of people might drive through a city like this and not think much about it even before the hurricane, but to you, this was a dream. And I remember the first day that when we were looking at the house that me and my wife ended up buying, she walked in and she loved it and she started crying. And, I realized the realtor knew that I was on the hook, and, but you dream of it and you want to get here.
Yeah.
And you get here for 6 years and you do this. And something that struck me when you were walking me around and we were looking at all the damage, and we walked into your room where you keep all your gear, And I said, just because I was curious, what stuff did you choose to take with you when you evacuated? And that's when I realized that you were over in New Orleans. You didn't even have a chance. And you said your wife grabbed some paperwork and the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
But to just have your wife evacuate out and then to be in New Orleans and then to come here after the hurricane, could you just tell us what it was like to drive back into this city and come up to your house filled with all your gear and things that you've accumulated?
Yeah, and I obviously, it's weird, and a lot of that stuff is my tools and what I use, and I had what I needed for Louisiana with me, but I had 10 times that here that I use for everything else, for whatever reason, I wasn't even that worried about it in that sense when I guess I was more worried about the bigger picture. Because I'd made my way back I was going to try to come here. I ended up going to LaGrange where my parents live and kind of staging there and formulating a plan because they weren't letting anybody in to the immediate area for 3 or 4 days. I think Saturday morning was the earliest they would let you in, and that was only if you were, could show proof of residence. And so, I was pretty optimistic. We could see on Google Earth that the house was still where it was supposed to be, on the lot. We could also see that most of the trees were down because they had updated the Google Earth so people could kind of see that.
I didn't know that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
they put up by like Friday. I think by Friday they had current satellite imagery up from what are those 2 satellites that circle the Earth that take all the photos?
The
Nova
and something,
something. Yeah. So anywho, they had updated those photos so that you could get on Google Earth and see it. And we could see that the house next door was not where it was supposed to be, and that the trailers around the block were not where they were supposed to be, and some of them were missing altogether. So we knew it was bad, but we knew when we bought the house that it was well built. It was custom built for in the 80s, and it was, the inspector before we bought it said it's built like a, like Fort Knox. Well, no, it wasn't quite enough to prevent it from getting rearranged. But as we drove in, we left LaGrange at like 2 a.m. on that Friday night, Saturday morning. Kind of thinking we'd be able to get in here right at first light, and the trip took a lot longer than we thought, just because of the down trees and the lack of roads and access. It took us about 10 hours to get down here, which would normally take about 4.5. But as you start driving in through South Georgia, North Florida, and seeing the destruction that far north, 1.5, 2 hours north, your heart starts to sink and your stomach's in your throat, and that it can't be good either way. And then when you get into like Weewa, 25 miles north of here, and see or even further north into like Bluntstown, and you see the destruction there, and you're thinking, my God, we're 150 yards from the coast. And so as we make our way down 386 and come into it comes into the beach right in between Mexico Beach and Beacon Hill and then St. Joe Beach, you immediately, you come out right by what was the Lookout Lounge, and you see that it's not there anymore. And you take that left, and as far as the eye can see, most of the houses on the beach side were now on the north side of the highway, and they just had carved a little path through the debris piles as you drove, east on 98 towards St. Joe Beach.
I remember that first left when we came. You couldn't even go left. They had it blocked off, and that big blue 3-story house was dead center in the road.
Yeah. It was and then we take a left onto our street here in St. Joe Beach, and you can't get up the street. The street's completely matted with huge pines. And these two guys, young guys, were cutting trees with their chainsaw and pulling them out of the road with their old beat up Dodge pickup truck. And then you realize that it's bad, you know. You'd think after 10 months I'd get over it, but it doesn't happen that easy. So we pulled into the house, and the house actually looked okay. Just looking at it from the outside, we could see the trees laying on it and whatnot, but it was there, you know. But we knew it was there, but we didn't know what the inside looked like. We didn't know if the water had even been inside. And we walked up to the side door that came through the kitchen, and I unlocked it and went to open it. It wouldn't open, so I had to bust it in because the house had been kind of torqued or whatever. And as soon as you walk in, you see the flooring, like one of that luxury vinyl flooring, was just curled up like noodles. And the furniture, all the couches and the chairs and the furniture was nowhere near where it was supposed to be, because it had obviously floated around in the house. And that's when we knew that it was, you know, worse than we, you know, obviously had wanted it to be, but worse than we had expected. And then we didn't even know the extent of it at that point. But we knew it was bad, and we laughed and we cried and we, you know, joked and whatnot. But the reality of it was more or less a shock. Not something that you can just walk in and wrap your mind around. Just almost unbelievable, you know. I mean, you just can't really get a grip on it. And it took a long time to get a real grasp of the reality of the situation. And when I say a long time, I mean several weeks just to even get your mind wrapped around it. And then after that, you have to start, you know, trying to figure out, wait, where do we go? You know, where do we go from here? Not like where do we go when we leave, because we're not leaving, but what are the steps we got to take to fix this, you know? Of course, we didn't have power for 30 days, 40 days. You know, there's no gas, there's no water. So there was a lot of challenges involved. I was back and forth from Louisiana. You know, we start doing things like buying generators, and we had a friend of a friend who let us borrow a travel trailer, to park in the yard, so that when we were here, we had somewhere to stay. But it was tough, and still, obviously, talking about it still is, kind of brings them back, you know, the memories of and the reality of seeing it. But yeah, we you know, my wife is super positive, probably more so than I am sometimes, and we just made up our minds we were gonna battle through it and keep our heads up and do whatever we needed to do to work through it. And that's what got us this far. So yeah.
And we talked to Jordan Todd, who he's a little bit ways from here, but they took a good beating as well. Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the positives, I think that was really cool. So I was over with a group in Panama City, but Austin was with a group of guys that we know, some guides out of Homosassa out here, chainsawing and helping do projects.
Unbelievable, man.
I mean, just to see the destruction was terrible. And I think just to me, you know, even driving in today, kind of emotional to see people's life, and
still totally upended.
And there's stuff happening today that was happening 5 days after the hurricane when we were here.
Yeah.
They were pulling the side off a building that was clearly being torn down. And it was like they haven't even skipped a beat since probably the day after. And it's just been constant work. And I was telling him, we had an interview. They interviewed a couple of people in the parking lot of the condominium that we were doing work at, and they were asking all the locals, "Are you going to stay? Or do you have plans on rebuilding?" And every single local had the same exact answer: "This is our town,
Yeah.
and like this is the only place we know, and of course we're staying."
Yeah.
And I was just telling him it was so crazy to me to just look around, and like you said, you don't know where to start.
Yeah, you don't know where to start. It took a long time to even.
But those people were just so adamant. They're like, "Of course we're staying." It wasn't
Yeah.
even in their mind of if. It was just like how they're going to stay. It was super powerful.
And there are people that are selling, but most of those people were people that there were vacation homes. They weren't their primary residence. They didn't choose to live here full time. And so there are people that are selling lots and whatnot where houses got completely demolished. And I don't blame them for that. I mean, the lot's probably worth more than the house ever was. It'd probably been paid for 30 years and handed down, and they just didn't have it wasn't their home, but another amazing things, like y'all said, y'all came down with different groups and did things to help out and whatnot, in your own ways, but a lot of people did that. I mean, it was pretty amazing to see, and still it gets talked about like, oh, we've been forgotten, and we didn't get the attention that we needed or deserved, with the storm and the size of it. But all that aside, the number of people that did come down, whether it was through, church groups or just volunteer organizations or whatnot, was absolutely amazing to see the army of people, pouring in to help out and to cook food and to, we have a little church up the way that we're not members of, Beach Baptist Church. Kind of became like the hub for the neighborhood, regardless of who you were, what you thought or believed or whatever. It was where everybody went to get their meals, to get toilet paper, to get, all the donations came through there from all the groups. And, but that's just one little example of a lot of that similar or same, scenario going on up and down the coast.
Yeah, I was telling him about when you first come down, I forget the name of this highway, but the house there that is sort of on, like, has a moat around it, all the water. And then there's
on 386.
There's the big antenna, and the big field there. I was sort of explaining to him that was like the central hub, and they were expanding from then and sending stuff. But the amount of volunteers that were just dropping stuff off or handing out stuff, it was just...
Yeah, it'll get to you. I mean, it's amazing. It really is. And it couldn't happen without it, without the support of people you'll never meet. You'll never know who they are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that haven't changed around here as far as when you drive in. I mean, there's some rebuilt houses and areas that look good, but there's a lot of areas too that don't look untouched. But there's also this sense that, even talking with you, that there was some, although the city might not have changed a ton yet physically, it seems like the people have changed a little bit. It brought the community together. Could you speak to that a little bit personally?
Yeah, and definitely here in our neighborhood, we were new to the neighborhood. I kind of keep to myself and do my thing, and I'll help anybody out if they need it. But I'm not one to go, baking cookies and taking them to the neighbor or to do,
You don't carol or...
No, I haven't caroled
anything.
in quite a while since since I was forced to. But my wife is. She gets out and walks the dogs and exercises, and every time she comes back, she's met somebody new. But at that point, we were fairly new in the neighborhood, and we know about half the neighborhood, if at least half of the local residents now, or if not more, because of the storm. I mean, the fact that people had to come together and had to check on each other. We all gathered at the Beach Baptist and ate meals together and shared our stories. And I think that happened, up and down the beach in different little neighborhoods and communities, all along the coast here, as far as people really, people that wouldn't do it like me, being put in a position where you need to do it. You have to do it.
You kind of got forced outside of your shell a little bit on that.
Exactly. And now we know all these folks, and not necessarily that we're going to have dinner with them on a weekly basis or anything, but we do know them now. We can say hey to them and know who they are and what their story is, and it's kind of comforting to know. It kind of brought it back to some more like what you see or heard about 40 years ago or whatever, and before everybody got kind of technologically past that, and kind of brought back a sense of neighborhood, more so than I think is the case in a lot of places, this day and age.
What was the biggest challenge dealing with just trying to bounce back as far as getting things put back together? I know that you've had some frustrations with the insurance company, and I mean, what has been some of the challenges you've experienced?
Outside of insurance, or insurance is obviously a big part of it. We're definitely not, it seems like that's the case with 9 out of 10 people that we know or that we've talked to, or that you even hear their stories on the local Facebook groups or whatnot, which there's some good ones here that, are very, very, useful in getting information and sharing information and whatnot. Other than the challenges of not having, infrastructure, there's no gas stations in Mexico Beach or St. Joe Beach anymore. There's no grocery store. There's no, we just got our Dollar General back a couple of months ago, which was a huge deal. Simple as it seems. But still we're facing, personally, we're facing the challenge of trying to figure out what to do with our house. We've been, pretty much, advised that it's not worth salvaging. It's not salvageable. The weight of not knowing what our result with our insurance company is probably, the biggest challenge, the not knowing, because we still don't know. And it might be a year or more or longer, 2 years before we really know. Now we've gotten to the step where we have a lawyer, and now it's in the lawyer's hands, and there's just a lot of unknowns, that you don't know if we're going to get another dime out of the insurance company, or if they're going to come back and say you're getting full coverage.
Wow.
I'd say the unknowns at this point are the most mentally taxing of the we've weathered the physical parts and the cleaning up and the resetting up our new little trailer and our and cleaning up the yard and doing all that with the help of friends and family, and I'd say now that the just the waiting and the wondering what the end result of all this will be is the most stressful aspect of it.
What was it like going back to Louisiana, however long after, and just getting back on the water and getting with clients, and you're trying to talk to them about it, but you're probably trying not to be a Debbie Downer the whole time. And
But I was, and this may sound bad, I don't know. I was really happy to get back to Louisiana. I'd seen what the deal was here. I knew that there was that it was what it was, and we had done what we could to fix our situation the best that it could be at the time, and we'd helped the neighbors and whatnot. And my wife was not at the hospital because the hospital was destroyed, so she was going back to Atlanta to her mom's when and then we would reconvene here for 3 days or so every week or two to do a little bit more to help out where we could. But yeah, getting back on the water was, and I was probably not at my best as far as chit-chatting it up with the clients and that aspect of it. But I was glad to be on the water doing what I love to do, and that helped kind of relieve the stress of the overall, the big picture, the reality of life back here. Ironically, a lot of clients from various places around the country, and then some from other countries. A lot of them didn't have any real clue. As crazy as it seemed, because of our situation, and obviously being in the direct impact. But a lot of people, if I didn't bring it up, it wasn't coming up. So a lot of times I didn't bring it up. I didn't feel like it was something that needed to be talked about. Now, if people brought it up and asked about it, and which most clients do, is, where are you from? What's your deal? This, that, and the other. I would bring it up, but I'd still try to downplay it. I wasn't looking for sympathy or anything. I was trying to give them the best thing, the best experience I could give them. And trying to focus on what the day was, and not my personal situation. But some of them were helpful and offered advice. Some of them had been through similar situations or other big storms, and some of them were lawyers, and some of them were worked for insurance companies, and some of them so you got some knowledge and perspective, and from some of them who were concerned, and then some of them had no idea it even happened. So. But it was definitely good to get back over there. I got a good group of friends that I guide with over there, and buddies that I guide and live with over there during the season over there. And it was good to get back in that company. And a couple of them were from South Florida, had been through Andrew when they were younger. And a couple of them are from Louisiana and had been through Katrina and Isaac and other pretty significant storms. So you kind of got some relief talking to folks that had been through similar situations.
Would you say that your experience with the restaurant business helped prepare you for this process? It was a battle every day. I know you said the restaurant business. Yeah. I don't know if it directly did or not. Definitely, and I don't know if this is what you're asking, but I mean, I was running my own business. I was dealing with a lot of people on a daily basis, and stressful situations on a regular basis, and we actually went through, I can't remember which hurricane it was. It might have been Isaac that came up through there. We had the power go out for 10 days in Auburn, Alabama, because of downed trees in the storm. But I don't know if I ever even equated it to anything to do with the restaurant business, or even thought, Yeah. You're the first person to ask that, and I don't know if I could say yay or nay on that.
What has this taught you about adversity, though? In what ways have you learned about adversity and pushing through because of what you experienced the past year?
I mean, I was raised by some hardworking parents, and parents that worked for everything they got. And I think that some people are gonna be okay, and a lot of people are gonna work through it, and then a lot of people are not gonna be able to handle it. And those are the people who are gonna move to other places. But me personally, I mean, I like I said, we were determined, and still are determined. I think it teaches you that if you make up your mind, you're gonna make a bad situation work until it's back to a better situation. Then you just gotta put your head down and grind it out, and not give up.
I feel like that's so poetically encompassing being a guide, like exactly what you just said of like grinding it out, figuring it out, and like
Yeah, I could.
I feel like it is so similar in the fact that it's always a process and it's always like,
Well, you're trying to figure something out every day.
yep, you're learning.
Every day's different. You know, every situation, every client's different. And every day you got a puzzle, and you got to put that puzzle together to have success. And some days are obviously going to be easier than others, but the key to it is to keep pushing forward, to make up your mind you're going to figure it out, and not give up, and then you'll have some good days, and you'll have some tough days, but you got to know that if you make up your mind you're going to pull through it and keep working at it, it'll work out. You'll figure it out and succeed.
And I know you said that at first it was definitely challenging just to have your head in the game with clients while you're trying to figure out what's going on back here. Mm-hmm. But are there some ways that you feel like it's made you a better guide?
You are throwing some tough ones at me. Now, I don't know. I don't know if I can say yay or nay that it's made me a better guide. It might have made me a better person, as far as knowing that I can, make up my mind and get through something. The adversity of the situation, which I guess would relate to guiding. But yeah, I don't know if I could directly relate those two. Going through a hurricane and
you didn't get any special, fish senses or
no, I didn't. It didn't wash any of that.
You didn't catch any tailored redfish in
no.
your kitchen or anything.
It did create a few new spots out here that were fun to figure out, though. Where
don't say too much.
Yeah,
don't say too much.
Trust me, it doesn't matter anymore.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was just people coming in from out of town and helping out. And the way that you got on our radar was through some mutual friends at Guide Beer, mm-hmm. because we're partnered up with Guide Beer. And a cool thing that they're doing is they're taking 11% of the proceeds that go to Guide Beer, and they're giving it to guides in need. And you had the honor of being the first guide who mm-hmm. received funding. Could you just tell us about the experience of having them come down and working with Greg Deeney and David Mangum and Freddie from Sweetwater? I mean, it's kind of neat. You mentioned earlier, there you were at the beginning of this whole adventure at your restaurant, and Freddie uh-huh. comes in, and you guys have Sweetwater Brewing Company, and you got your 24 taps, which was a big deal back then. Uh-huh. And then here you are, fast forward over 10 years later, and you're in one of the most challenging times of your life, and you have the team come down here, and you get to be the first person to actually get the proceeds from this beer. Could you just tell us about how that all went down and how that's helped you guys? Yeah.
We first time I'd ever really seen or heard about Guide Beer, we were doing it was ironically about 5 days after the hurricane. It was a Yeti kind of tournament with over at Journey South in Venice. That was a tournament for the ambassadors and Yeti employees, and they chose, I think it was about 25 of us, maybe guides that were taking the ambassadors and the Yeti staff, members out to do a little fun redfish tournament. And Sweetwater had provided a lot of Guide Beer. I think it was prior to it.
I like the way you raised your eyebrows when you said that.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I wasn't even there the whole time, because I was here. I was supposed to guide the whole tournament, but I was here for the first kind of 2 days of the activities and festivities over there. and I got back the night before the last day, so I did end up getting to guide the last day of the tournament, and everybody obviously was, it was the talk, what's this guide beer and whatnot, and I didn't even think about it, the 11%. I knew the deal, and I really didn't even think to myself, I could use that. Because nobody really knew what the deal was at that time. They hadn't promoted it really. It was just kind of they were kind of testing it at the tournament, but obviously a lot of people there were very concerned about my situation, I think as time went by and Sweetwater really started promoting the idea and kind of released it to the public, and we're starting to kind of distribute it. Obviously, some of my guide buddies, that you mentioned, Greg Deeney and David Mangum, kind of lit a light in their head, saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we got a guy right here that is a perfect candidate for the idea, and man, if I could give that check back and not have to have done any of this, I would, and I don't, nobody should want 11% of proceeds from guide beer, and so I never really thought much of it. I knew those fellas had kind of expressed, that I was a guy that could probably use some help, but I didn't really know that there was anything going on that involved me, at least, behind the scenes or whatever. They kind of kept it from my knowledge, and as they, I guess, figured it out, because I think it was new to them too. They didn't know exactly how they were gonna, proceed with the program, with the benefit of the guide beer. So I think, they were kind of figuring it out as they went. They knew they had a good idea. They knew they had, they were thinking about guides who show a lot of people a lot of good times and a lot of firsts and a lot of best, and they were trying to think of a way that they could kind of take care of guides that were caught in a bad situation, that didn't necessarily have a safety net, so I guess Deanie and Dave and Tucker and Freddie and all them kind of got together, without me knowing, having any knowledge of it, but and figured out how they were going to do it, as far as presenting, the check and whatnot, and it was a total surprise to me.
Yeah.
David, he'd put on the calendar that I was fishing with Freddie from Sweetwater, and still I didn't think to myself, that's the deal. Because Dave kind of played. Dave did kind of say that that guide beer deal. They just want to kind of talk to you and see what your perspective is on all this or whatever, and it might have kind of somewhere in the back of my head crossed my mind, but I wasn't expecting anything, and I didn't, I was just like, okay, well, I'll talk to him and talk about my experiences and whatnot, and so I went and picked Freddie and Tucker up over in Appalachia the morning that they presented me with the check, and we chit-chatted a lot on the way. Freddie and I reminisced about, he remembered coming down to Locos and introducing Sweetwater to Alabama, and I showed him around. We drove around a little bit as we came over, and I talked about this and that in the different areas and what that used to be, and just kind of talked to him about my story and whatnot. And it was horrible weather. It's blowing like 25 out of the southwest. Swells were like 3.5 feet, just hammering us. But we went out there anyways and threw anchor.
So you caught a lot of fish is what you're saying?
We went out there and,
Adversity.
and threw anchor and took them over the bow for about maybe 45 minutes.
They said, "Screw it, let's just get back to the boat ramp."
And let me step back. They had already done the presentation there at the boat ramp, and I knew something was up when I pulled up. I knew Dave was going to be there. Then I saw Deanie in the truck with Dave, and that's kind of when the light went off in my head. Like, wait a minute,
Am I getting fired right now?
Yeah, what's going on here? I knew there was something to it then when Deanie had stepped out of the truck too. And so we sat there and kind of talked, and Freddie, gave me a nice little kind of I don't want to say speech, but presentation, about God beer, and he summed it up the best with his, God, y'all are the guys that show us the way, and I know that. I think it's it's right here on the can, but it really kind of sunk in right there that we are, as a whole we provide stuff to a lot of people that need it and want it, and without us, a lot of them wouldn't have the ability to go do it, whether it's tarpon or tailing reds or whatever the case may be, hunting, fishing, whatever, without our knowledge and our, skills and our tools and our, they wouldn't have the opportunity to benefit from that, which means a lot to a lot of people, as far as getting away from their 9-to-5s or their, 70-hour weeks or their, the things that stress them the most. They get to get out there and forget about all that and enjoy a day that, whether it's 100% successful or it's no fish caught. It can still be a successful day. It can be a learning experience for them and myself, and still be a great day. But yeah, I mean, he really hit home with kind of just reiterating what's on the can, and it meant a lot to me. Not just the fact that he was writing me a check. The check was nice. It is. I mean, I can't thank him enough. It is definitely a stepping stone in the right direction. No, it's not going to build me a new house. But it gives me hope, and it gives me, and it lets me know that I'm, I have a chance to, and I'm going in the right direction, and I'm, greatly appreciative of every penny of it. If there was more, other, industry type businesses or organizations that would kind of jump on board with the idea and do it in their own way or join forces, and I think it would greatly benefit a lot of people, guides in the future.
And the reason that we decided to partner up with Guide Beer was because I realized that this was something I actually approached them. It wasn't them approaching us. And I think something that's really neat about it is that it's obvious that they weren't just trying to say, here's something cool, let's take it and brand it and make money off of it.
Yeah.
It's no, here's something that began with the team over at Sweetwater and Freddie valuing guides, and not just putting a cool slogan on a can and saying, let's make money and we'll give them a little bit, but actually caring about guides. And to me, that's what mattered, was these guys aren't just trying to make a buck off of the brand. They're actually trying to do something positive. And I think that if that can influence other companies to step it up and do the same, I hope it does, because
I think it will.
As much as you guys get thanked as guides by clients, thanks man, thanks.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you talked about your clients not knowing what this room that we're sitting in right now looks like. There's a lot of guides, not just people who live through hurricanes who, they're going to take you out on the best day of your year, but they're going to come home to some adversity, and they're going to have things that they're challenging through. If you're okay with it, I'd love to transition to some fun rapid fire questions.
Yeah, we can try that. Some of those serious ones were stumping me.
It was kind of getting heavy.
I know. I was like, when do we get into that rapid fire stuff? It seems lighter.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Here it is right here.
Obviously, I am an emotional dude. I mean, I got, sitting here talking about it, and when you get down and grind into it, it still 10 months, 11 months later, it still gets me. And I don't want to say I'm a soft guy or anything, but it's a life-changing event that really kind of just grabs you and, gets a hold of you, and it's tough to shake it, man. It's a crazy deal.
And it's kind of a twofold thing for me. Just last thing on this, and we'll move to our fun rapid fire, is one, the amount of destruction. I mean, just how far and how wide this hurricane just crushed crops, crushed trees, crushed homes. And that itself, looking at it, is really impactful. But I actually think, as impactful as it is to drive through this area and to see all the destruction, I actually think that it's more impactful and more challenging and more emotional to sit in a room like this and to know that this is a room that,
A fly tying station took up that whole wall. We had plants, and this was a cool little sunroom with couches and plants and, stained glass hanging in the window, and it's just a shell.
It's personal when that's the kitchen that you
the
invented
kitchen.
shrimp and grits with corn in it and before you sold your recipe in.
That's it.
All right, let's get into some fun rapid fire questions. So earlier you were telling me about the time that you bench pressed 400 pounds.
Without a sweat.
No, seriously. So, what was the biggest challenge making the transition from being a country boy that grew up with a little coastal experience but didn't grow up on the coast? What was the biggest challenge for you coming in and moving here and going full time at it?
I would say learning it every day. It's one thing to come down and fish a weekend, ask the guys at the outfitter in town what's biting, and go out there and catch some trout or some reds. It's another thing to learn it in every condition. And we don't get to cherry pick our weather, our wind, our conditions. We gotta take people out there and try to show them, a good time, a successful time, regardless of conditions. So just getting used to putting that puzzle together during every fishable weather condition probably would be the biggest challenge.
Outside of having a different insurance company, what would post-hurricane Cleve tell newbie in the business Cleve?
Newbie in the business Cleve, buy a house that's about 10 feet off the ground.
With pontoons on it.
Yeah. Newbie in the business Cleve, he would probably try not to live so close to the water. Fish the water, don't live so close to it. Live a little further north, a little higher.
In what ways has your interaction, as you've gotten connected with a group of guides that have become your lifelong friends, in what ways have they shaped you? Knowledge,
not just in everyday fishing scenarios, but how to handle situations, clients, different personalities on the boat. So just a general knowledge of people, and it's the knowledge you can share is irreplaceable. Because if you got 5 good guide friends that are fishing 5 different places, and you're all being honest and truthful, and then you've got 5 different perspectives on the same day from 5 different places to learn from for the next day and the next client.
What do you think makes a great guide?
Patience and determination.
What's your favorite type of client to have on the boat?
Laid back, skilled, caster who can listen very well.
That seems to be a reoccurring theme.
I think that those types of clients are the same ones that own unicorns, and
They're about 1 out of 50, maybe. When you get that combination, that all comes together. But I think the longer I do it, and the more I learn, every day, from all the different types of clients, the more you learn to work around each client's pitfalls or lack of skill or positive attitude in certain areas, and you can learn to really turn a client that you might have thought about at the beginning of the day you'd rather not fish again, to a client that you'd love to have back out on the boat.
outside of fishing and bench pressing, what are some other fun hobbies that you have?
I do a little bit of diving. My wife and I are going to do some diving in the Keys next month, if the weather is conducive. Hiking, do a good bit of hiking. Not as much in the probably the past 5 years as I would like, but I do a good bit, on the trails in North Georgia and different places when I get to travel. And can't say fly tying because I really don't enjoy fly tying that much. I've gotten really good at fly buying lately, though. Now that my tie-in station got demolished in the storm.
You're what the kids would call the plug. You get a hold of the hard to reach flies and then resell them and turn a profit on them.
I just hoard them.
You just get the real cool, popular
hoard 'em.
patterns. And no,
What was the Appalachian Trail like?
It was an amazing. It was about 6.5 months that me and a good friend spent hiking it. We started in Georgia, went to Maine, and we told ourselves we were going to do it every 10 years, and that was in 2000. So we hadn't done it since, and we may not ever do it again. But
I think you should.
We would love to, and I would love to. I know he probably would too. It's an amazing experience if you could ever afford the time to do it, in its entirety at once, then by all means do it. If you did it in 2-week sections or 1-week sections over the course of 30 years, then I would suggest trying. It's a incredible way to spend some good, wholesome time in the outdoors. Not that it was all that wholesome, but it was.
You were comparing it. Comparing it to not having air conditioning and stuff here. I always picture that movie. Did you ever see that movie Into the Wild, where the dude floats butt naked down the street? That's the one. That's the one scene that's like burnt into everybody's mind.
There was some crazy stuff that happened.
I guarantee you there was.
Wasn't that? I don't think it wasn't that crazy. Extreme.
It was a different time back then. It was a different time back then. No,
I've heard you run into some pretty interesting people on the trail.
Yeah, you run into a lot of I mean, I would like to think that I was somewhat interesting, but not in the ways that you're referring to.
Yeah, I've had some friends in college that did it, and they have some stories.
Oh yeah, you meet some characters, man. There's a lot of people that are out there for a lot of different reasons, and you get to
soul searching.
You get to spend a lot of time, whether you want to or not, with a lot of them over the at campgrounds at night or shelters at night, or just you happen to be within earshot of them walking the trail for 3 hours. You get some pretty cool, crazy experiences.
All right, enough with floating naked down a river.
Yeah.
Back to the fish. What is the biggest mistake you see people make when they begin fly fishing?
Not getting lessons. I don't want to say the majority, but a lot of people that hop on the boat have no real skill when it comes to casting a fly rod. I think they like the idea of it, and that's great. You got to start somewhere, but I think before anybody should just jump on a skiff and go for it, they should spend about the same amount of money you'd spend on a guided trip on a weekend or 3-day casting clinic, and would probably benefit tenfold, and get way more probably enjoyment and reward and success out of their trips if
Down
they
the
would-
road.
Yeah, if they would invest some time in lessons and then practice those lessons. I know that because I get guys that hop on the boat that tarpon fished with me last year, and they still have the same leader that I left on their rod this year, and it doesn't have a grass stain on it or a nick on it or anything. And I asked them, so how much have you been, practicing since we fished last? Oh, I hadn't. And it shows every time, makes it tough. So practice and lessons and practice would be the key to success, I think, and from that perspective.
My last two. If you could only put one thing on a billboard for every person driving into the Forgotten Coast to see, what would it say?
Man, that's a tough one.
Get the shrimp and grits.
Get the shrimp and grits with extra corn and fish with Forgotten Coast on the fly.
There you go. At least you're honest about it. You're the first one to say that. And my last one is, when you think about the end of mine, here you are. I mean, I know that you're going to push through and you're bouncing back, but you started the restaurant. You always wanted to be here. You're here. You're doing what you wanted to do. What does success look like in the end for you?
I mean, obviously, as I get older, I'm 43. I'm not old, but I'm 15 years from now, 20 years from now, I'll still want to be and probably need to be guiding. It'll probably change a little bit, in my in what I in how and what I do. I may get a bigger boat. I may change. One day I might be an old bottom fisherman. Who knows? But for the next 20 years, I want to do basically exactly what I'm doing now. And when I get to a point, whether I'm 65 or whatever, or I feel like, hey, I'm getting too old to do this, professionally on a daily basis, I'll probably change gears and change speed and use some of the stuff that I've learned in the 20, 25 years I've been guiding and keep fishing.
Manatee tours.
That'll work.
That's what
That's
I
the
heard.
guy too.
Hey, thanks again for hanging out
Scallops.
with us today. And
Yeah, man.
it's been incredible to see the city and just to see your resilience. So
Yeah, thank
keep
y'all.
moving forward.
Yeah, man. I appreciate what y'all are doing here. It's awesome, man. Keep it up.
Hey guys, thanks again for listening to the Captain's Collective. To continue to help support this podcast, please share through social media and through word of mouth. It goes a long way when you go out and recommend it. We're so grateful for you guys. Thank you for being a part. This is the Captain's Collective.